Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tome of Uselessness. I'm Dan, solo casting today, and I wanted to talk to you about some recent books I've read. A friend of mine, earlier in the summer, he turned me on to the Libby app, Libby, and what it lets you do is hook into your local library's ebook lending, so you don't have to, I don't even know, deal with their system or whatever. So I was able to go get a library card. I didn't have one for the VPL and get in there. And then since then, I've read a lot of books and I just want to talk to you about some of them today. This is not really in a particular order about like when I read them, but they were in the more recent times. Let's see. I just finished maybe yesterday. The first two books is A Book of the New Sun, which is by Gene Wolfe. It's an older sci-fi series. This is a reread, so it's not really something I'm going to really talk too much about. I think I read it like 7 years ago or so, and I felt like I just didn't absorb it at the time, and so I wanted to give that a reread. And it's pretty good stuff. I think it's from like 1983, I think, is when the first one came out. So it's an older kind of thing, but it has a neat kind of twist or idea in that it's like the far-flung future, like a billion years in the future kind of thing. So it's still sort of got some sci-fi medieval tropes, but it's in a different kind of time period. So it's a classic. But for the rest of the books here, what I've kind of done is I went to the internet, Wikipedia, or wherever I could find it, and then just kind of copied a line or two from like the book's official synopses, just to kind of give it to you guys what it says it's about, and then I'll probably talk about just some of my thoughts about it. I don't think I'm going to go too deep into them. I also don't want to spoil them. There'll be a couple of them that I'll warn you about, but I'll talk a little bit about them. But like I said, I just don't want to get too in depth because maybe you want to read it and know some of the cool twists that they have. I was thinking about doing, just a single kind of thing about one of these books, or maybe two of them. But anyway, decided I'm going to just talk to you about like 7 books here, maybe more. So let's go right into it here. The first 2 here are nonfiction books. And the first one was The Terror Years by Lawrence Wright. So here's the little synopses. These powerful investigative pieces, which take us from the religious police of Saudi Arabia to the rise of the Islamic State, comprise an essential primer on jihadist movements in the Middle East and the attempts of the West to contain them. So this guy, Lawrence Wright, he also wrote The Looming Tower, which is about the 9/11 attacks, and it's really good. He also wrote Going Clear, which was about Scientology. They made a documentary about it on HBO as well a few years ago, which was also, I read both those books, super good reads, highly recommend them both. And this book, and I think he says it in the intro, is that some of these stories come from that same period of time when he was investigating the Looming Tower, and they just didn't fit in the book, or they happened around that time. But then there are some other ones that take place in the more modern era, and some of them are pretty chilling, there's no doubt. I found it's a really good read. It's very informative, and these stories go really into depth because he's an investigative reporter. It's like, we hear a lot of stuff from that area of the world, but it's usually always not like a clickbait article, but you know what I mean? It's like just like a headline, or it's like a, hey, this is happening and, there was an attack or this. So it was good to read these in-depth stories and some of these events. And it was pretty interesting. Some of the, just like he interviews the people that live there. Like, I don't know what these people deal with, right? So it's intense stuff. Great read, though. Would highly recommend checking both, or all 3 of those books I named. But this one was The Terror Years. The next one was called The Perfect Weapon, and it has a long subtitle. Something like, I think it's like War, Sabotage, and something in the information age. But it's written by David E. Sanger. And so The Perfect Weapon is the startling inside story of how the rise of cyber weapons transforms geopolitics like nothing since the invention of the atomic bomb. So this one's about cyber weaponry and hacking in the current modern age. It was interesting because it goes back to early hacking from almost like Cold War type era to the present and talks about the cyber weapons that are being developed and how they're being used, and how information warfare like this it's a very leveling playing field for like an asymmetrical world. So basically how like North Korea can compete against America in this arena because, it's cheaper to develop and you can have your agents operating in the world and attack anywhere else in the world because of the great information technology we have in the internet. But what's really interesting was basically he also I think he's an investigative reporter, and he has access to these generals and he speaks to some of these people that are involved in these programs. And what was interesting was that the world doesn't have any mechanisms to respond. So basically, he would talk about an attack that happens, and even one that America's done, like famously the Stuxnet one against Iran, but some that happened back in response. But there's no mechanisms for, like, what do you do? If someone bombs something, how to respond, essentially, right? Like military action or whatever. But they don't know how to respond. And much of the time in the book, it seems, and in these stories, is that they know who did the hack, but they don't want to reveal how they knew that, because then it would tip their hand about how they've hacked the opponent or the person who did the hack. So then everyone's just like, we know they know that they know, but no one wants to say how they know because then it'll reveal how they know. Which is confusing on purpose, basically. And it's like they want to keep these things secret. But his argument, and I think it's in the 0 Days documentary as well, they talk about it, is that some people want to bring these weapons to light, and he's like, we got to talk about them because we know now how to do real damage, or how it can, not hack, but classic War Games, the movie, it can look like there's a nuclear attack and someone might respond to that, when of course that's not happening. So it was a really good book. One of my main interests, of course, and something I do for a living, involves computing. So it was just really crazy how to see. Basically, it's like, we're so screwed. was the main kind of thing. Takeaway was, it's just like all this stuff is happening a lot. Yeah, just no one wants to talk about it because then no one knows how to deal with it, and no one wants to kind of deal with it. The Obama administration, he talks about them quite a bit in that they use sanctions, economic sanctions or trade sanctions against these attacks. But, America was doing it as well. And so it's like, there's these weird kind of things. And even in Canada, I assume we've been the victims of these kind of crimes and stuff. So it's a very interesting book. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling a little about it, but worth checking out. Very recently published. I think it was published in 2017 or 18. So really up to date about this kind of happening and what's going on in the world, right, about that. So that was The Perfect Weapon. Highly recommend checking that out. So the rest of the books are either fiction or sci-fi kind of thing. The next few here are by the same author, and his name is Daniel H. Wilson, and he's published quite a few things, and I think a couple of his first works were on the comedic side. I think one of them's called How to Survive a Robot Uprising, but I didn't read much of his stuff. The first book of his I read was Robopocalypse, and I didn't read it till pretty recently, maybe last year I think it was, because the cover is so generic, the title is so generic, and it has the most generic sci-fi premise. A computer scientist accidentally unleashes a supremely intelligent sentient AI named Arcos R14. It becomes self-aware and immediately starts planning the elimination of human civilization and building new cryptic ecologies, where the organic is being merged with robot technology. So I was kind of like, whatever, because I was just unfamiliar with his works, and I was, I had seen it and it had shown up in some great lists and stuff, so I was like, okay, whatever, I'll check this out. So it wasn't a very long book, maybe 400 pages or so. and it was extremely good, extremely excellent. I could not stop reading it. And after I finished reading it, I was just like, wow, it felt very real, like, and very near future and real world technology or scenario. And then when I looked into Daniel H. Wilson, the author, turns out he has a degree in robotics. So he knows what he's talking about when it comes to this kind of tech. So recently, like I said, with the app, I was kind of looking through and discovered more of his works. So I read Amped, which, let's see here, a little synopsis. In a near future where the neural autofocus and other neural implants made formerly mentally challenged individuals into equals or superiors to those with normal brain functionality, Owen is a high school teacher whose surgeon father helped develop the implants to control his epilepsy. When the United States Supreme Court rules that implanted individuals are no longer a protected class, Owen's life is changed forever. This was a cool book, I felt. It was just a neat little story and brings to the forefront, prejudice that would probably develop, and I could see it happening essentially with these kind of technologies, because the basic idea is that, people are like, oh, people with this tech are going to be smarter, better, faster than unimplanted individuals, and that gives them an unfair advantage. So they lose their protected status in the States, and then chaos just breaks out, kind of a thing, it's pretty crazily depicted in the book, but it kind of plays with the idea about, unimplanted individuals versus implanted individuals, and plus the military, how they would, develop this tech because they would want their soldiers to be better, stronger, faster, and how that would affect civilian life, essentially. And I really enjoyed it. Again, this was not a long read either, and the narrative itself was kind of standard hero's journey stuff, but it was just a neat perspective and neat technology, again, involved in it. So if I go any deeper, really, it'll just kind of spoil a lot of it, but it was pretty cool. Worth checking out. So the next one here, so Robogenesis, which I discovered is a sequel to Robopocalypse. Let's see here. Spread across the far reaches of the world, the machine code has fragmented into millions of pieces, hiding and regrouping. In a series of riveting narratives, Robogenesis explores the fates of characters new and old, robotic and human, as they fight to build a new world in the wake of a devastating war. This is a sequel to Robopocalypse. I was immediately annoyed or frustrated about this book because the first book ends very well, and it was a really tightly told story, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. I thought maybe, before I read that synopsis, that maybe it was like, other stories during the same war that Robopocalypse takes place, just other areas and stuff like that. Because that kind of thing happens a lot as well with either writers or, movies or TV shows. So I was kind of disappointed when I started reading this and realized, like I said, spoiler here, but the villain of the book is another AI that was a previous generation of Arcos. I think it's R8, I think, in the book. And R14 was trying to prep humanity to fight it. I just felt that I was like, man, it just kind of, makes the events of the first book, it just annoyed me. I could be wrong about this. This is, again, my opinion. But I thought it would have been better because, like I said, the code has been fragmented. So I was like, oh, maybe it'll be pockets of the code doing something weird here, and then, people fighting it or whatever, investigating it. It seems like that would have been a good direction to go as well with the story, instead of having to introduce, because then he starts introducing all sorts of crazy stuff in it. I enjoyed it for the most part, especially if I just kind of shunted aside my annoyance. But, it was all right. I think for sure reading the Robopocalypse is the superior one, but that happens a lot sometimes with, sequels and stuff like that. So middling recommendation on this one compared to some of the other books I've been talking about. And let's see, the last one from Daniel H. Wilson here was called The Clockwork Dynasty. So interweaves past and present, exploring a race of beings designed to live by ironclad principles, yet constantly searching for meaning. Couldn't really find a better synopsis for some reason at the time, but basically this one, it centers on clockwork automatons from the distant past. And this one, again, there's going to be some spoiler stuff here. It's implied later in the book that they were created and crafted by the Atlanteans, because there's some few lines about like the first men and like the island that they were on and stuff like that. So at least that's my interpretation. And that the automatons helped humans rise up to form civilizations in China, like form the first one in China. And that the first emperor and empress and the court, they were the automatons that survived the Atlantean, destruction or whatever. So it was cool. I mean, again, this is like some classic, immortal type stuff, because these automatons don't die for the most part. And the story follows the past events of the main automaton, Peter, when he was when he was rebuilt during Peter the Great's life in Russia. And so it just kind of follows his story, as well as it, follows the events of a woman in the present. And she kind of she researches these automaton and then eventually becomes embroiled in like their conflict and what's going on in their life and kind of thing. It was pretty cool. It's interesting because his writing, like I said, it's not really like pushing some kind of like weird envelope narratively and stuff like that. Like I said, these immortal beings, if you've ever read a vampire book, you know that they're immortal, but it's a cool twist on it, and it's a cool take, and it's just interesting to hear or read about the life of these automata through times to the present, and then what's going on in the current time with their conflict and how they're surviving still. And they do some classic stuff where he invested in past businesses and what have you, and of course they're thriving today, so he's a billionaire. It's good stuff. I think of the three that I read of his, I thought the Amped was pretty cool, just because protagonist is more, like I said, a little more like a sympathetic, like everyman kind of thing. And the Clockwork Dynasty one was just interesting because at first I was just unsure of what to expect about. I was like, how is he going to write about robots that are like sentient from the past, right? So, but he made it work, and then the Robogenesis, it was all right. It was kind of just like, I think it would have worked better had the first book not ended so like conclusively. It was just more like, oh, the war continues, okay, and here's more stories, kind of like other series of that nature. But all three of those, enjoyable stuff, and his writings are pretty good. There's I think a new one out this year that I want to try to check out as well. So next, talk about it's called Old Man's War by John Scalzi. And I found this book by searching space opera in the Libby app, because I was like, oh, you know what? There might be some cool space opera stuff. I discovered afterwards that this is a 6-book series. I'll just give you the synopsis here. So, Old Man's War is about a soldier named John Perry and his exploits in the Colonial Defense Forces, CDF. The first-person narrative follows Perry's military career from CDF recruit to the rank of captain. It is set in a universe heavily populated with life forms, and human colonists must compete for the scarce planets that are suitable for sustainable life. As a result, Perry must learn to fight a wide variety of aliens. To start with, I thought this was kind of a neat concept when I was reading it, that the only people they take into the CDF are 75 years old. And other areas of the world, and this is mostly from like rich Western nation, kind of like American kind of thing, other regions of the world where they have overpopulation issues, they get to go out into space but as colonists, not as the defense force. And so they mainly recruit this defense force from the senior population. And so as I was reading the book, and even in the book, I kind of start joking around about it. They're like, what are they going to do? How are we going to be soldiers? And I was thinking it's either going to be robots or clones. And it turned out to be clones. But they're like genetically enhanced clones, of course, right? So they have technology built into their bodies, and this is in the future, so they have smart blood that they can hold their breath for 15 minutes because it holds more oxygen. They, night vision eyes and implanted brain technologies and all sorts of stuff like that. It goes into it in the book. But it was pretty cool. It was kind of reminding me a little of like a Starship Troopers kind of story where it just follows the soldier from when he's a recruit throughout his career. Basically, it's like it said in the synopses, they are competing for the planetary resources, and some, species are more overpowered, some are less powered, some are on humanity's equal footing with the tech that we have. Other times they encounter things that are, wholly out of our control, and they just have to abandon things. So it was a cool story, and I really enjoyed the story, the tech that was involved, and just kind of the narrative of it. It kind of also sort of, I might have to reread that section again, but it was basically they were hinting at like a multiverse kind of situation as well, because one of the stipulations when you join the CDF is you can never return back to Earth. And then they talk about it in the book, how basically the skip drive they use is how they get around, and it has to be used outside a gravity well. It's like the warp type technology, but it's actually moving between universes. So you can never even return to the universe you were in previously, but the universes you go to are very similar to the one you exist in, so it doesn't matter that you're going to a different universe. Which I was kind of like, I don't know. Again, it was even in the book, they were like, well, this is all experimental, we're not sure. So maybe it's an idea the author was playing around with, but he wasn't fully fleshed out with yet. So it's just kind of presented. But it was cool, and it was neat, and it sort of also has an idea implanted about how like there might be a behind-the-scenes galactic player who's controlling events or manipulating things for their own gain. Kind of like the Damned trilogy, which I really enjoyed, was, a sci-fi thing, and then it turns out like, there was 3 different twists about who was the mastermind behind the war kind of a thing. But so yeah, it was cool. It was a neat take on it because, again, normally when you get these kind of stories, it's always like, a young man or young woman or young person joining the military, and they get indoctrinated by the propaganda and this and that. And these are already people who have lived a life, and then so they know, they're not going to be fooled by some just BS. They're just like, you got to tell us straight. But then it was cool in the book how they talked about they wanted these people, because they've lived a whole life, that they are able to process things, and they know the value of defending humanity essentially on these frontiers. So it was cool. I definitely want to check out the rest of it. Would recommend that one. So next up here on the list, it was called Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, which is, let's see, Dark Matter is the story of Jason Dessen, a mild-mannered college physics professor who gets abducted one night by a masked man, conked over the head, injected with something, and wakes up in a world that is not his own. So this one, it's a cool multiverse story, and it's about his struggle to return to his own world. This one, I think I'm just going to leave it at that, because anything more I say will essentially ruin anything about it. There was some twists, some turns, and some reveals. Like I said, I feel if I talk about it, it'll just ruin that one. So check it out, though. It was cool. It turns out this guy's written a couple books, I think, on this kind of idea, multiverse kind of stuff. It wasn't that long of a read, and very much read like a modern day movie or episode of a good television show or something like that. But that's not a knock against it. It was, it was brisk and kind of kept you involved, and you were wanting to know what happened next. Dark Matter, that was that called. And the last one on my list here is Red Sparrow by Jason Matthews. So, here we go. Dominika Igorova is a former Russian ballerina who was forced by her uncle to undergo espionage training for the Russian government at the Sparrow School, where people are trained to seduce their targets. So this, of course, is the book that the movie Red Sparrow was based off of. I think I've mentioned before, but I like to do it backwards. I like to watch the movie, then read the books, or watch the TV show, then read the books if I can, because the book is always, more in depth, better characterizations, etc. And, TV or movies, they have to make certain choices or sacrifices. So I usually try to not to be angry about it. But this one was weird to me because I also didn't realize it was a trilogy of books. So that was kind of clouds some of my judgments about the movie, because I don't know if they were taking ideas from further into the books to then transpose into it. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time comparing the two. I thought about doing a single episode about it. I still might. But one of the things that bothered me the most, I think, about the movie was that she was a different character, Dominika, versus because a lot of times, they do that. And that's fine in certain aspects. But in this, it was really weird because they have the same scene where Dominika gets purposely injured by another ballerina. She learns who is responsible. And in the movie, she goes and beats them with a golf club. And, breaks some jaws and some legs. It's intense. But in the book, she realizes that that's like the easy way, because she thinks about doing it, but instead manipulates events so that these people get caught and get kicked out of the school and therefore disgraced, which is a far better and elegant solution to her issue and like her revenge. So I don't know. Immediately right there, I was a little thrown off by the character. And one thing that that little synopsis I read at the start and the movie fails to show is that Dominika is but she goes through like extensive security bureau, I think it's FSB. She goes through like spy training, like a ton of it, which she super excels at. Like not street work, but like, developing assets and just like spy school stuff. And she's really good at it, and she really likes it and wants to continue to do that before she is sent to the Sparrow School. And the Sparrow School is seen as like the lowest form of espionage because it's just used as like a seduction method. And she resents it entirely. So you don't really get a sense of that too much in the movie. She's just more just kind of like, oh, I got sent here. This sucks, but whatever. Whereas in the book, she is like, this is the worst. Why did they do this to me? Kind of thing. So it changes the motivations a little bit and shows how much more training she has compared to the other people that are in the Sparrow School, because in the Sparrow School, they're just like taken and then being like, oh, okay, you'll be good at seducing men or women or whatever, but not be like a spy, right? So again, kind of a big difference there. But I did enjoy the movie for the most part. But enough about that anyway, before I start ranting again. So the book, though, it switches point of views between Dominika and Nate from the CIA. And so it gives a good view of the different espionage tactics and thinking between the Russian and the American methods. And I liked how it showed how different they are, building their assets and their gadgets and their technology and how they get information in and out of areas and what they think and how similarly, of course, their tactics are. It was really cool. I liked that a lot. One thing about the story, and I thought this was a movie decision. Sorry to get back to that, but and in the book, though, it's the same, is they both know that the other is a spy. Like right away. Which it sort of works. Like it makes sense through the story narrative because Dominika, she's assigned to Nate. They know he's an American spy, but then he finds out she's a spy like right away. And I was like, man, there wasn't even any, like, show us reasons or investigations. I mean, there is, but I don't know, it just felt like too quick. But then it sort of works for the story, because then he's trying to, like, he knows she's a spy, and he's like, maybe I can work her to become an asset. And she, of course, is trying to work him to become an asset. So it was kind of cool in that way. I did like how it takes place in modern times, because a lot of times, spy stories typically like Cold War kind of era, especially with Russia. So it was cool that it took place in a more modern era. And the book had some good sections showing operations, again, being run by the Americans and being run by the Russians, and the steps they take to how to make them work, and like their surveillance methods and what they do. Of course, because it's a book, they can kind of gloss over it. It just mentions, it's like, oh, then they waited 6 hours. But of course, in a movie or a real life type situation, you'd just be sitting there waiting for 6 hours, right? But it's great that we can kind of just be passengers along in this world, as it were. Turns out Jason Matthews, I briefly read a little bit, it turns out I think he used to work in the CIA. So he knows some of the intelligence methods in the world a little bit. So I did like the book overall. Plan on reading the rest of the trilogy, and I would recommend checking out the book. I think especially if you felt the movie was good, or maybe you had some issues with it. I think if you liked the movie or you didn't like the movie, the book is worth reading, because then it's better in both cases, essentially, right? Because it raises it all up above the bar. And again, because it's a trilogy, I don't know if they were taking some stuff from the future to bring in, and some of the ideas and what have you. So Red Sparrow by Jason Matthews. So yeah, that was a bunch of books here. I'll just go through the list real quick again. So I had The Terror Years by Lawrence Wright, The Perfect Weapon, David E. Singer, Amped by Daniel Wilson, Robogenesis and the Clockwork Dynasty, Old Man's War by John Scalzi, Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, and then Red Sparrow. Some recent reading that I've done, and just wanted to kind of tell you guys a bit about them. Like I said, I like to read a lot, and it's very cool being able to use this app now and get more access to the library. It's just like a super convenient way. So, not that it's insanely difficult to go to the library, but it, just cuts out the middleman, right? Highly recommend checking that out if you can, and get dialed into that app and check out some of these books. So you can check us out at tomeofuselessness.com, where you can find episodes with Devin and I, and more solo stuff by her and I. You can also find our episodes on iTunes, Spotify, wherever else you get your podcasts. Our website also has links to our Instagram, Twitter accounts, Facebook, and what have you. You can find us on there as well. You can contact us with questions, comments, topic suggestions. I recently did get an email with some ideas, so that's at tomeofuselessness@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.